The rain fell like bullets. David's headlights barely cut through the black curtain of water hammering the windshield. The deserted road stretched endlessly ahead, no cars, no lights, no life, just darkness. And then something moved. Small, dark, collapsed in the middle of the asphalt. David slammed the brakes. The car skidded, tires screaming against wet pavement. His heart pounded in his throat. Through the rain-streaked glass, he saw it. A puppy, soaking wet, shivering, eyes half closed. But even from here, something was wrong. Its paws were too large, disproportionate, like it was wearing shoes 3 sizes too big. Its ears too pointed, too tall, and when lightning flashed across the sky, those eyes snapped open, sharp, focused, glowing faintly gold in the darkness. Not pleading, watching, calculating. David's hands trembled on the wheel. The puppy's head turned, slowly, toward him, and for one breathless second, David felt like prey. David sat frozen behind the wheel, engine idling, wipers screeching across the glass. He'd been driving for hours, running from a life that felt too small to suffocating, a job that meant nothing, an apartment that echoed with loneliness. No destination, just away. And now this. He stared at the tiny creature sprawled on the wet pavement. Leave it. Keep driving. It's not your problem. But his hand was already on the door handle. The rain hit him like a wall the moment he stepped out. Cold, brutal, soaking through his jacket in seconds. David knelt beside the puppy. It was so small, maybe a few weeks old, fur-matted and dark with rain, ribs visible beneath the soaked coat. But those paws, even collapsed, even half dead, they looked massive, built for something bigger. Hey, little one. The puppy's eyes cracked open, and David froze. Those eyes, they weren't the cloudy, confused gaze of a dying animal. They were sharp, alert, aware, and they tracked him, following his every movement with unnatural precision. The puppy made a sound, not a whimper, but something louder, guttural. Then it went still. David exhaled slowly. Okay, I've got you. He scooped the trembling body into his arms. It moved, fast, a brief, jerking twist like instinct kicking in before going limp again. David's breath caught. That was unnormal. But the puppy's breathing was shallow, fading. Stay with me. Come on. David hurried back to the car, cradling the puppy against his chest. Inside, with the heater blasting, he wrapped it in his spare hoodie. The puppy's chest rose and fell in shallow, desperate gasps. David pressed the gas pedal. The rain roared on. By the time David reached his small rental house on the edge of town, the storm had softened to a drizzle. He carried the puppy inside, still wrapped in the hoodie, and laid it gently on a pile of towels near the radiator. For an hour he watched, waiting. The puppy's breathing steadied. Color returned to its gums. And then, slowly, it opened its eyes. Those eyes again. Gold-flecked amber. Too bright. Too intelligent. They didn't blink. David grabbed a bowl of warm water and some leftover chicken from the fridge. He tore the meat into tiny pieces and placed it near the puppy's nose. The puppy sniffed, recoiled, like the cooked meat was poison. Didn't touch it. Instead, it tilted its head, studying him, calculating. You need to eat, David whispered. The puppy's ears twitched, not like a dog. The movement was sharper, more controlled. David reached out to stroke its head. The puppy's lip curled, just slightly, and David saw them. Teeth, needle sharp, too many. Too sharp for a puppy that small, curved inward, like hooks. He pulled his hand back. The puppy watched him, calm, patient, waiting. David exhaled slowly. What are you? That night, David couldn't sleep. From the living room, he heard sounds. Not whimpering, not barking. A low, rumbling growl. Then silence. Then soft clicking sounds, claws on hardwood. Pacing. Then a sound David had never heard. From a dog. A howl. Short. Strangled. Like the puppy was trying to make a sound it didn't know how to make yet. David's blood turned to eyes. He crept to the doorway and peered inside. The puppy was awake, sitting upright in the moonlight streaming through the window. Its shadow stretched across the floor. Too tall, too angular, wrong. Its head turned toward him, slowly, deliberately. And for a second, just a second, David could have sworn its eyes glowed brighter, reflecting the moonlight like mirrors. The puppy didn't move, just stared, watching. David backed away, his heart hammered in his chest. He closed the door and didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, David told himself he'd been imagining things. Exhaustion, stress, the storm. The puppy was still there, curled on the towels, looking small and helpless again, almost innocent. David watched him for a long moment. You need a name. The puppy's ears perked up. David thought of the shadow on the wall, the way the creature moved in darkness, the way it seemed to belong to the night. Shadow, he said quietly. I'll call you Shadow. Shadow's eyes opened, fixed on David, and for a moment, David could have sworn the puppy understood. Over the next few days, Shadow grew stronger. He drank water, ate raw meat only raw, never cooked with an intensity that made David uneasy. He tore into it, shaking his head violently, like bringing down prey. But he also did something else. He stayed close, followed David from room to room, sat at his feet while David worked at his laptop, curled up beside him on the couch at night. Shadow made sounds David had never heard from a dog. Not barks, chirps, soft, questioning chirps, like a bird, like a question. And sometimes, late at night, Shadow would rest his head on David's pillow, his golden eyes half closed, his breathing soft and steady. In those moments, David felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose, connection, like he mattered to something, like he was needed. One evening, David sat on the floor, back against the couch. Shadow climbed into his lap, still so small, and rested his head on David's chest. David stroked the soft fur, feeling the steady rise and fall of breath. I don't know what you are, he whispered, but I'm glad I found you. Shadow's eyes drifted closed, and for that moment, everything felt right. David was no longer alone. But Shadow didn't stay small. In a week, he'd doubled in size. His coat thickened, his legs lengthened. His paws finally matched his body, and his movements. David noticed it first when Shadow jumped onto the kitchen counter, a 4-foot leap from a standstill. Effortless, silent. He noticed it again when Shadow caught a bird mid-flight in the backyard. Not clumsy puppy playfulness. Precision. Instinct. Predatory. Shadow landed with the bird in his jaws. Didn't play with it. Killed it instantly. Clean. Efficient. Then he looked at David. Eyes calm. Unblinking. Like he was waiting for approval. David's stomach turned. Shadow's eyes followed him everywhere now. When David cooked dinner, Shadow watched from the doorway. When David showered, Shadow sat outside the bathroom. When David went to bed, Shadow was there, sitting in the corner, watching, always watching, not with aggression, with focus. Like David was the most important thing in the world. It should have felt comforting. It didn't. David's neighbor, Mrs. Keller, knocked on his door one afternoon. Her face was tight, worried. David, honey, I saw your new dog. Yeah. Found him on the road. She frowned. That's not a dog. David's pulse quickened. What? My Buster won't go near your yard anymore. He barks at the fence, tail between his legs, whining like he's terrified. I've never seen him act like that. She leaned closer. Her voice dropped. And last night, I heard something. A howl. Long and wrong. Her eyes searched David's face. That didn't sound like any dog I've ever heard. David forced a smile. Shadow's harmless. Mrs. Keller didn't look convinced. Just lock your doors at night. She left. David closed the door. His hands were shaking. That night, David woke to howling. Not barking. Howling. Long, mournful, wild. Echoing through the neighborhood. He stumbled into the living room. Shadow stood at the window, silhouetted in moonlight, head thrown back. The sound was deafening, primal, ancient. David's blood ran cold. Outside, dogs began barking. Panicked, frantic. Car alarms went off. Lights flicked on in neighboring houses. Shadow. The howling stopped. Shadow turned. His eyes gleamed in the dark, cold, bright, unblinking. And David realized he'd never heard a dog make that sound. The next morning, his phone exploded. Texts, calls, voicemails. Mrs. Keller, what the hell is that thing? Unknown number. You need to get rid of that animal. Another neighbor. My kids are scared. David stared at his phone, then at Shadow, curled peacefully on the couch. What are you? By noon, someone had posted a video online. Close-up footage of Shadow howling at the window. The caption: Man unknowingly raises wolf in suburban home within hours. It was everywhere. TikTok, Twitter, Facebook. Hashtag Wolfboy was trending. The comments poured in. He should known. Dangerous. What if it attacked someone? Poor thing. It deserves to be free. This is what happens when people don't research animals. He's a hero for saving it. He's irresponsible for keeping it, Muse fans. Parked outside David's house. Reporters knocked on his door. Mr. Hayes, can you comment on the wolf? Were you aware you were breaking the law? Do you feel responsible for putting the neighborhood at risk? David sat on the floor of his living room. Shadow curled beside him. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. Cameras, voices, flashing lights. Shadow's ears twitched. He growled softly. David stroked his fur. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. The next morning, David called his friend Marcus, a veterinary assistant. Can you come look at my dog? Something feels off. Marcus arrived an hour later. He crouched beside Shadow, who watched him with calm, unblinking eyes. Marcus reached out to touch him. Shadow's lip curled. A low growl rumbled from his chest. Marcus froze. He looked at Shadow's teeth, his paws, the shape of his ears, the ridge along his spine. His face went pale. His hands trembled. David, where did you find him? On the road. During the storm. Why? Marcus stood slowly, backing toward the door. I need you to tell me exactly where. What part of the road? What time? Near the old logging trail, north side. Around midnight. Marcus. What? This is not a dog. David's stomach dropped. What? Marcus pulled out his phone, fingers shaking as he typed. Look at his teeth, his bone structure, the way he moves, the sounds he makes. He showed David an image. A wolf cub. David's mouth went dry. That's not possible. David, you need to take him to the wildlife clinic. Today. Marcus's voice was tight. Urgent. If I'm right, you're not just keeping a stray. You're keeping something wild. Something that doesn't belong here. He glanced at Shadow. And if people find out, they'll panic. David stood alone in his living room after Marcus left. Shadow watched him from the couch. Calm. Still. David's phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Keller. Channel 9 News is outside. They want to talk about a mystery animal in the neighborhood. David's heart sank. He looked at Shadow. We're out of time. David carried Shadow wrapped in a blanket into the wildlife veterinary clinic on the edge of town. The vet, Dr. Iris Tannen, was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with decades of experience. She took one look at Shadow and her expression changed instantly. Her eyes widened. Set him on the table. Now. David obeyed. Dr. Tannen moved carefully, her hands steady as she examined Shadow's teeth, eyes, paws. She ran her fingers along his spine. She paused, pressed gently on his skull. Her jaw tightened. Shadow didn't resist, just watched her. Dr. Tannen stepped back. I need to do an X-ray. Is he okay? She didn't answer. She just stared at Shadow, like she'd seen a ghost. 20 minutes later, Dr. Tannen returned with images on a tablet. She set it on the counter. Her face was unreadable. Her hands were shaking. David. Yeah. This. She hesitated. This is not what you think it is. David's heart hammered. What do you mean? Dr. Tannen swiped through the images. Bone structure. Skull shape. Dental pattern. This animal is not a domestic dog. David's breath caught. Then what is he? Dr. Tannen met his eyes. He's a wolf, or at least part wolf, possibly a hybrid, possibly pure. The words hung in the air. That's impossible. He was tiny. Helpless wolf cubs are small and vulnerable, especially if separated from their pack. She leaned forward. David, listen to me. He was never what you thought, Doctor. Tannen pulled up another image, a map. The area where you found him. It's near the Black Ridge Forest Reserve. So, there's a reintroduction program there. Grey wolves, They've been slowly bringing them back into the wild. David's pulse roared in his ears. You're saying Shadow is a wild wolf cub, likely displaced during the storm, maybe separated from his mother during a hunt. She looked at Shadow, still calm on the exam table. He imprinted on you because you saved him. But David, he's not a pet. He never was. David stared at Shadow, those golden eyes, that sharp, knowing gaze. All this time, he'd been raising a wild animal, a predator. What happens now? David's voice cracked. Dr. Tannen's expression softened. We contact the wildlife reserve. They'll assess him. If he's healthy, they'll attempt reintroduction. If not, he'll go to a sanctuary. And if I keep him, you can't. It's illegal. And even if it wasn't, she gestured to Shadow, he's already showing signs. He'll grow. He'll hunt. He'll need a pack, a territory. Her voice was gentle but firm. He doesn't belong in your house, David. He belongs out there. David felt something break inside him. But he's mine. Dr. Tannen's eyes filled with compassion. No, David, he was never yours. You were just holding him for a while. The Wildlife Reserve sent an official letter. Mandatory surrender within 48 hours. Legal action threatened if non-compliant. David sat on the couch, Shadow's head resting on his lap. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The news coverage intensified. People he'd never met had opinions about what he should do. He saved that animal's life. He deserves to keep it. He's endangering the community. Wolves kill. This is about the animal's welfare, not his feelings. David turned off his phone. He looked down at Shadow. Those golden eyes gazed up at him, trusting, calm. And David realized something. Shadow didn't understand what was coming. He didn't know about laws or wildlife reserves or reintroduction programs. All he knew was that David had saved him, and David was his world. I don't want to let you go, David whispered. Shadow's tail thumped softly against the couch. David's eyes burned. But Dr. Tannen's right. You don't belong here. He stroked Shadow's fur. You belong out there, with your kind, where you can be free. Shadow made a soft chirping sound. David's throat tightened. I thought I was saving you, but maybe keeping you here would be the cruelest thing I could do. He pressed his forehead against Shadow's. You deserve more than this. The morning of the surrender. David woke before dawn. Shadow was already awake, sitting by the door, waiting. Like he knew. David knelt beside him. You know, don't you? Shadow's golden eyes met his, calm, steady, not afraid. David's throat tightened. I wanted to keep you. I wanted you to stay. He pressed his forehead against Shadow's. But you were never mine to keep. He pulled back, his eyes wet. I was just holding you for a while. Shadow leaned forward, licked David's face once. Gentle. And David understood. It was Shadow's way of saying goodbye. At the Wildlife Reserve, Dr. Tannen and 2 rangers were waiting. David carried Shadow one last time. They walked through the trees, deep into the forest. The air was cool, crisp, the scent of pine and earth. Shadow lifted his head. His ears swiveled. His entire body went alert. And then a howl, distant, echoing, answered by another and another. Shadow's entire body went rigid. Every muscle coiled. His breathing quickened. David set him down. For a long moment, Shadow didn't move. He looked back at David, and David could have sworn he saw something in those eyes. Gratitude, understanding, goodbye. Shadow took a step forward, then another. Then he stopped, looked back one more time. David smiled through his tears. Go. It's okay. Shadow turned and ran, fast, graceful, wild, his form disappearing into the trees, into the shadows, where he belonged. David stood there long after Shadow was gone. The forest was silent, peaceful, and David realized something. He hadn't saved Shadow's life that night on the road. Shadow had saved his, reminded him what it felt like to care for something, to protect something, to love something, even if it meant letting it go. Dr. Tannen stepped beside him. You did the right thing, David nodded. I know, but his chest still ached. Months later, David returned to the forest. He hiked the same trail where Shadow had been released. The air was cold, the ground covered in fallen leaves. And there in the distance, he saw them, a pack, moving through the trees like shadows. Grey forms weaving between the pines, and at the edge golden eyes. Watching, David stopped. His breath caught. Shadow, bigger now, stronger. His coat thick and wild. But those eyes, still the same. Shadow didn't approach, just watched, and David understood. This was Shadow's world now. He belonged here, with his pack, wild, free, alive. David raised his hand. A small wave. Shadow's ears twitched. Then he turned and disappeared into the forest. David stood there for a long time, listening to the wind in the trees, the distant call of birds, the quiet breathing of the forest. And he whispered into the wind. Sometimes love means holding on, but sometimes it means letting go. He smiled. Shadow had found his home, not in a house, not with him, but where he was always meant to be. Wild, free, whole. And David had found something too. The understanding that love isn't about possession. It's about knowing when to hold close and when to set free. He turned and walked home.